Okay, what is up, everybody? I am doing a special kind of segment called Hit Record on the Bass Podcast, where, not everybody loves talking about how to record drums, I don't know, all the other engineering fun stuff, maybe a little extra nerdy in the pedal department, a little less bass guitar heavy. So we're taking this little side road called Hit Record. My friend Tyler Young helped name it. So here we are. I reserve the right to change it, and if I change it, you'll see the title later. But I have a special guest with me, Mr. Jesse Honig. Believable Audio is his lab engineering multitude that he does. 29 Pedals is his pedal company that you'll see stuff like. I'm a big fan of the Una. He's also an engineer that a big recent release was Lizzy McAlpine's older record that he engineered. So what's up, man? How's it going?
How's it going? It's good to see you, Carson. Everything going all right?
Everything's good. Kentucky is 60, which 60, is a big deal for us. We had snow the last week. Are you in LA?
I'm in Los Angeles. Yeah. It
so
turned
it's
into
like
summer
great
here
all the
last
time.
week.
Okay.
Yeah, it was briefly cold, which I enjoyed. Like January, February are kind of reminiscent of my home state of Pennsylvania in terms of the cold.
Right.
But it very quickly just turned back into summer. Like today, it's like 70 degrees out already.
Yeah. Did you come to LA for music stuff? Like, was that
I did, yeah. In like 2007, I owned a small recording studio in Philadelphia, and I was recording there, and I was also doing like, I was working as an assistant engineer at a couple other larger studios, and things were just kind of drying up for me there, and I had a bad relationship with the landlord of the studio, and it was just sort of before it became cool again to have sort of mixed fidelity in your records, like lo-fi cool things. That was still in the era of everybody wanted to have top 40 rock sounds. And so a studio opened up the street that had, a fancier console, and I lost a lot of business because of that. And a friend of mine whose record I had been engineering wanted to mix it out in LA with a friend of ours, Shane Smith, who had already moved out here. And so he flew me to Los Angeles in like January of 2007, and I had never been to Los Angeles before. And if you grew up in Pennsylvania or anywhere colder than Pennsylvania, of which it shocks me to say that there are places that are colder than Pennsylvania, but there are. If you grew up in a cold place and somebody puts you on an airplane in January and flies you to Los Angeles, it's pretty hard not to fall in love with it. And
absolutely,
despite how popular recording is around the country and around the world, there just is more of it here than there is in most places. So I immediately was getting gigs and a lot of work, both as an engineer and as a tech. And even like people were hiring me for sessions as a studio musician when I first landed. And so I moved here within a month or two of having seen it for the first time. I just sort of closed up my studio, put everything in storage, and I put 2 guitars on a plane, and Appetite for Destruction style, like showed up in LA with my 2 little guitar cases.
Amazing. And when you say tech, are you like, is this like engineering in a studio? Not engineering, but like literally engineering, or is this like guitar tech?
Both. Like my first job when I was 13 was a guitar tech, and so like being a stage tech and a roadie is like something that is kind of dear to my heart, even like as my career seems to progress like to fancier titles. I still do those kind of gigs from time to time because I find them very enjoyable, and it's something that musicians really need. And I always just kind of think of myself as like a person providing services to musicians. So like I'm friends with Blake Mills now through just the world of engineering and stuff like that. And he's a wonderful dude. He called me up and just asked if I would tech for him for a gig last year. He had a one-off random gig. And yeah, I still do those kind of guitar gigs where I'm like carrying Blake's guitars and making sure everything's in tune and plugged in. And, it's something like when a musician that you think is a great musician asks you to help them out, you just say, yeah. And,
for sure.
And so I do that, but also to answer the original question, I also, there weren't a lot of studio techs in Philadelphia that could fix gear. There was like one or two people, and we all kind of had to learn to fix our own gear because of that. And so when I moved to LA, I realized I had more proper like bench tech skills than your average audio engineer. So I got a lot of work fixing compressors and building studios and wiring patch bays and things like that, just because I could do it and not a lot of people can do that kind of work.
Were you self-taught? Did you go to school for that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go to school. Like I barely graduated high school. In all honesty, I was already like working and gigging and stuff, and I kind of had no patience at that time for things like that. Although I have a lot of patience for it now. But I had some mentors along the way. I hesitate to say that I was fully self-taught because I feel like that's always sort of a bit misleading, because people definitely showed me how to do things. But like one of my first engineering jobs was working for this amazing audio engineer in Philly, Andy Kravitz. And, he just asked me to recap a module one day as part of my studio duties, and I didn't know how to do it. And so he got out the iron and he's like, here's how you change a capacitor. Bop, bop, change, da, da, da. Showed me one time. And then, from there, I taught myself to be better, and I would read about it and learn about it. And then just the act of doing it for so many people over the years, you get better at it. So I would say it's a combination of having some really strong mentors and just brute forcing my way through learning how to do it, breaking a lot of my own shit and having to fix it. And then, next time somebody else, I mean, I've done the thing before where like, somebody needs something fixed and like, I'll find another broken one and buy it and try to fix it so that if I totally blow it up, I blew up mine and not theirs,
That's awesome. I love that. Okay. So that kind of brings us to the engineering thing. Well, engineering in multiple senses.
Yeah, I still just refer to myself as an audio engineer when people ask what I do, because it's like it touches on all the facets of what I do. Sometimes it's a nebulous title anyway. It's not a.
I mean, it used to have to be that way. Like Motown was building their equipment.
Yeah.
It's only recently can you be an audio engineer that doesn't have to fix their own stuff. What a privileged position we are in now.
Yeah, and I go back and forth on it because I think having a strong technical understanding of what the gear is doing and what you're trying to do with it, sort of like, like people ask me what books to read about recording, and I always say that one of the books you should read is The Negative by Ansel Adams. It's a book about photography, but what it does, it illustrates to you how you break down a technical artistic process and like learn to be creative in every aspect of it. But you do have to learn a lot about the technical stuff. I mean, on the other side of that, like I say I go back and forth on it because like I never received formal training in any of this stuff. I have a love and a bit of an aptitude for the technical side of it. So I lean into that. I think it's very liberating because it's like in the era of like people getting tips and tricks online about how to record and not really ever studying the process.
Right.
And learning like the fundamentals, like one of my pet peeves is like the resurgence of the SM7 because it's a terrible sounding microphone and it's like a 58. It's a 58 without a transformer and an expensive chassis, and it doesn't sound good. And when I was coming up in the 90s, it was relegated to maybe like bass cab or kick out or something that didn't mind if it was a little slow and woolly sounding. And even then it usually was kind of relegated to whatever you thought wasn't important that day. And like, to see all these tips and tricks, upgrade your mic to an SM7. It's like, it's not really, it's a poor understanding it illustrates that there's a poor understanding of what microphones are on the inside and how they work. And, I'm not mad at anybody who loves that microphone personally, but it's not an upgrade from a 58. It's a 58. It's like, I mean, but 58s make great records, so it's like to live in a world where 58s are still shamed and somehow people treat the SM7 like it's a real microphone is like, that's what.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about status symbol, which doesn't have anything to do with audio quality.
Yeah.
In fact, like I like an SM7B, but I'm not like, actually, this is a good crossover. I have a creative media business. And so like part of the shtick was, man, I really like an RE20, but all
great.
of my clients thought that an SM7B was the status symbol. So I couldn't go bring a bunch of these weird looking mics with the even weirder looking shock mounts. But when you show up with SM7B, they're like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, I'll pay the premium price. Oh my gosh, I'm finally professional."
I mean,
I say this while I'm talking into a big brass, Soyuz mic, where that's their thing too. But
I mean, those status symbols are always interesting things to pick apart because they don't always actually relate to quality. But I think as soon as you like, I mean, perhaps it's like I grew up in a very like what's the word to use? Like, in the pre-internet days, there wasn't as much status symbol gear because people just didn't know that much about gear. So, like, I worked at a studio when I was a teenager. That guy, Andy, I was telling you about. Andy, he had a Neve 8014 and a BCM10 sidecar, and he had LA2s and 1176s, and he had every Neumann I'd ever heard of. And he got them all broken and fixed them, and that's what we had. But then you'd go to a nice studio up the street and you'd have, 414s and ADATs and a Mackie desk. And those studios also sounded nice. And sometimes it's weird to me which pieces of gear become fetishized and which don't. Because it's like, like the 414 I always think is interesting because it's had a rough history. But if you go back to like music magazines from the early 80s, engineers were throwing out their 47s and recording all their vocals on 414s, and like nylon capsule 414s, and then like it's coming back a little bit, but at the same time, people still don't think of it as like a really fancy mic. Whereas like a 414 it's really low noise, it's really wide bandwidth, it's variable polar pattern, it sounds good on just about anything you could put it on. If you asked me to make a record with only one style of microphone, I would probably say like a 414. Because it can just kind of do everything. And so why that's not a symbol of, I remember like in the 90s, the only time you would see them anymore is on like toms. And I'm like, these are great microphones. Right. Maybe live somebody uses them on overheads or something like that. But like everybody always wants the kind of new status symbol. And I that's one of the reasons I like having a technical background, such as I have it, is that it kind of liberates you from stuff like that. When somebody says a FET compressor and you know what that means, and you know that not all FET compressors are 1176s, you can kind of like wade your way through the jargon a bit and figure out what they really mean, Yeah. Like if somebody says they put an 1176 in a pedal this big, it's like, you may have made a cool sounding pedal, and I'm not mad that you made a cool sounding FET compressor pedal, but it's not an 1176. There's tons of other shit going on in there,
Yep. Totally agree. That's, as someone who even went and had all the like big box Cali 76s and then the small thing, and then,
which I do think are great sounding pedals. They are great sounding pedals, but it's weird to me that it must call out this other thing that it isn't, because, your design was inspired by it, sure, and it's handy to be able to name check it so people can quickly understand what it is. But at the same time, you made a great sounding pedal that isn't an 1176. Why must it be called that? It just, I mean, they do sound great,
Money is why we have to call it that. That's the,
Yeah.
Well, and devil's advocate here, like I have to understand, since I'm not to the level you are, I have to understand circuits by what they're referencing. It does the 1176 thing. Great. Okay. I'm actually going to pass on it for bass. I'm more of an LA2A guy on bass if I'm choosing. But I'm trying to get deep. This is me, whatever. I would like to maybe build my own pedals or mics coming up. I'm thinking about it. I don't have an abundance of time now that I have a child at home, but I might start with mics because I feel like it's a little easier. I could be wrong. Or maybe just different.
It depends on your soldering skill level. Mics are fairly if you're talking about fairly simple microphones, they can be relatively easy to build, but microphones, especially large diaphragm condenser microphones, the layout is really, really, really important. And there's tricks to the layout that aren't built into those kits because the kits aren't necessarily designed by people who know anything about building, like the little things inside. You know, you open up enough C12s and you see the things that are in there and how they're built. And then you open up enough warm audio microphones and you see how they're built. You understand why one sounds better than the other. You know, like, I'm never mad at brands for trying to hit a price point so that people can have the equipment. But I do think we do ourselves a disservice when we try to deny that there's a difference between some of these things. And some of those differences are just too expensive, you know, for an individual to, certain whatever. It's like, not everybody needs a C12, but I do think it's important to understand why it's a better microphone, or what about it may be better and how that may affect how you're using it. I mean, famously, like at my old studio, I had a standing rule that anything you could see had to have a mic on it and be operable, so that when somebody was like, "Oh, I want to play the ace tone," right? It's like, it wasn't like, okay, now we're going to choose a mic and like dial in a sound and we have to plug it in even. It was just like, no, if it is in sight, it is working and you can pick it up and you can play it with like 2 buttons on the console and have it going to tape.
Yeah, that's how my studio is right now behind me. So,
and it's like, but in order to achieve that, sometimes you put kind of cheap microphones on things because you just don't, that's why I have the AKG C1000, because it's like, it was an affordable small diaphragm condenser in the 90s. And it was like $200 in the 90s. But I've kept it with me and I've learned a lot about it. And it's like, that's the mic I used on the Beatty tour for his vocal, because after listening to him sing and seeing how he approached the microphone, it was the best choice, because you realize cool things about these microphones. Like, it's basically a 451 that you can hand hold and sing into, because it's got a ruggedized sort of chassis. And all of a sudden it's like, you get to know these microphones and you find that like lots of things have lots of cool uses on lots of stuff. And we do ourselves a sort of disservice by assuming that only like status symbol microphones work on things. And that like, it has to be a kick drum mic to be on the kick drum or whatever. If I like, another famous pet peeve of mine is that I despise the Shure Beta 52. I think it's like the worst sounding microphone that's ever been made. It's just like a low pass 58. They're terrible sounding microphones. And it's like, I would put anything else on a kick drum before then. And because I've done enough live shows where they just have a 52 for the kick drum, I have put everything else on a kick drum and I know how it works. You can make a 57 into a pretty good kick drum mic if you know what sound you're going for and know how you're trying to do it. I
actually did a video about a month or so ago where I shot out all the mics in my studio on my B15, and the amount of people that were like, well, sorry, I got to the end and I kind of gave my thoughts, and this mic won and the RE21, and I was kind of talking about like, it's a difference in, well, we'll get to this for what your preferences are too, but like when I'm showing up with a B15, all the engineers are using it for top end and they're using the DI for low end. Yeah. So all of a sudden the 57 became a really fantastic choice because a lot of that low end's not there anyway, and it sounded great.
Yeah, and it rolls the low end off in a softer way than the EQ would. So it's more pleasant sounding, yeah. Yeah,
so with that, tell me, since we have to talk about bass, what are some of your bass guitar preferences? And then we'll maybe talk about drums, and we might kind of have to talk about them at the same time.
Sure.
To make sense of each other,
I think they do kind of go together in terms of like when you're trying to build the foundation of a track. I believe very strongly in like a sort of pre-visualization kind of approach to engineering, where you really need to understand what you're going for before you try to do it. Because if you just put mics up and listen to what sounds good, you're going to end up with a lot of good sounding isolated tracks that don't necessarily make a mix. So how I do the bass guitar relates a lot to how I'm going to do the kick drum. And it's one of the reasons I've sort of I try to, in any context that it will work, I try to do a more Motown kind of kick drum, little bit higher pitched, but still pillowy, 2 solid front heads, because I feel like it stays out of the way of bass guitar the best. And after years of trying to mix 22-inch kick drums with Power Stroke 3 heads on them, with electric bass, and it's just really hard to it's funny because I think that's where some of the sort of bad advice that musicians are given when they're young comes from, where they people tell the bass player, oh, just play the root and play the notes, play the rhythm the kick drum is playing and play the root. And it's well, the only reason you have to do that is because the poor engineering will make it so that that's all that sounds good. If you have a kick drum sound that's not working with the bass guitar sound, suddenly you have to try to make them do the same thing instead of letting them do different things. And so, I usually do a smaller kick drum, like an 18 or a 20, trying to dial in kind of a Motown sort of pillowy sort of thing, so that the bass guitar can sit under it, because I do like a very low heavy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Bass sound.
Yeah,
I mean, I like mid-rangey bass sounds in some contexts, but for the most part, sort of Jamerson, McCartney kind of bass sound is still always going to sound best to me. Very tight, but very big low end, that's where I prefer to get low end in a mix from, especially if you have a cool bass player who's playing something cool. It can be really great, to have that sort of sound. I mean, it's hard to say, because that being said, then I usually use guitar amps instead of bass amps, because I feel like tonally they're a little better. Where a B15 breaks up doesn't work for my playing, and it doesn't work for a lot of the music I've worked on, but where a twin breaks up does. So I'll my bass amp, I have 2 bass amps right now. I have a big old Standell solid state that's amazing, but then I have a Rivera era Fender concert. And I just put low gain tubes in it and plug it into a bass cab. And to me, it's it works better, essentially doing the B15 thing, but right. I feel like you get more usable low end out of it. Cause the Ampeg stuff, I've never actually really loved it. I feel like SVTs are great if you're a rock bass player playing a P bass with round wounds with a pick. Then it's a great sound, right?
Right.
If you're Lemmy, right? Yeah, that'll be a great bass amp if you're doing that kind of thing. B15 is a little more versatile, but I don't feel like they have great real bottom. Whereas if you take a twin and plug it into a bass cab, it actually has an incredible bottom end. And then because I can modify gear like I've modified it, just opened up the low end a little bit to get a more rich sound out of it. And I don't love to mix DI and mic. I still might put both of them up when I'm trying to dial in the bass sound, but usually I try to go for one or the other. And for me, that means I strike it. I'm not a kind of person who will record both and decide later. I want to decide before we hit record. And so I'm only recording one bass track. And
nice.
I would say it's even 50-50 whether it's DI or amp, because, I always try to take a strong listen to the amp, but sometimes in some context of playing, the DI is just better. You kind of just can't get certain bass tones out of an amp. You have to get them through the DI. And so depending on how it's going to fit and what it's going to go with, I'll do DI a fair amount, but I'm kind of fussy about a good sounding DI. So if a good sounding DI isn't available, then I might just go back to the amp.
What's your good sounding DI of choice?
I mean, just a passive transformer based DI that's not a radial is usually a good bet. I think the radial stuff it's very tough, and it's designed to be tough, but I don't think they really sound that great. I've swapped Cinemag transformers into them and had it sound better. I build a lot of my own DIs just out of Cinemag transformers because they're relatively affordable, really good sounding transformers. I don't go hunting for old UTCs and building DIs out of them personally, because I think it's it's just a long process, and it can be really expensive. But anytime you hear one that somebody's bothered to do, they sound fantastic. And
I have oh gosh, let's see. This just came in the mail, and it's one of the Motown Acme's.
Oh yeah.
But it's with the original Triad. It's like they did one last run with the Triads.
That's
which
cool.
I thought it would be a bigger difference than it was because of the hype, transparently, and for the price I paid. I was surprised at I've never had a passive DI. All of my DIs are on a preamp, like the Noble preamp that I use right now, or like the Rupert Neve, which is an active. Those have been kind of my main things, but I didn't expect to feel like, as I play, a feel to it and a slowness.
Yeah.
Which I was like, I actually really like this, but I didn't expect what it was doing, you know?
Yeah. And I also think that, like, you know, the through on those DIs is just a passive thing. So the transformer is the bigger load of the two. But if you have it plugged into the transformer and an amp, you're kind of double loading the whole system down. So that's one of the reasons I like to do one or the other, because I feel like hanging the amp off that DI, it's like it does kind of change the sound a little bit. But yeah, those big old transformers have like a spongy feel to them. And then, you know, a nice little tube amp, a guitar tube amp, is a little bit more stiff feeling. And then also, like, what we think of as a DI, to me, also becomes kind of a matter of, like, technical understanding, because basically what you need is an impedance converter so that you can plug it into a line level source, right? So Una does that. Most guitar pedals actually do that, you know, to some extent, whether they're like hyper focused on it and do it in the best way possible, like Una does, or whether they just do it by an accident of being a piece of gear, right? But every guitar pedal you own is an impedance converter. And so sometimes just using a pedal and then plugging the pedal into the LA2, you know, as long as it can drive the transformer, like, that's one of the reasons I'm fussy about making sure that my pedals can drive a 600 ohm load, because you can plug a WAMP into an LA2 and it's a pretty damn good bass sound.
Now I have to try that.
You know,
shoot,
because the WAMP has the extra gain to do it. But Una can handle the load if you don't mind adding the gain somewhere else.
So I guess the big question on my mind is, why have you not come out with a DI?
Well, because what would I do? Like, I would do, I mean, I build them for myself, so it would be like a Una with a transformer on the end of it, but then it'll be like, oh, but then we need a loop for all the pedals, and then you're going to need phase flip and, you know, other stuff. It's like you start basically building a channel strip, so, like, you'll probably see a channel strip that just has a better sounding DI input than most other things. Man,
it's like someone said that in your DMs. That's like, man, you really need something like this.
Yeah, like interestingly, the DI input on most modern channel strips made by like Neve or whatever, the first thing it does is just bypass the input transformer. So that's different than using a passive DI and plugging into the mic input of a console, because the mic input goes to the mic transformer. Yeah. So if you did see me do something like that, it would be more like that, like a passive DI into a mic pre is more like what I would try to create in the studio for myself. So it's possible to do something like that. I mean, there's such a huge backlog of ideas, honestly, and I'm like, I like all of these ideas a lot. It's just a matter of, like, can they all have? I can build one of anything, but as soon as you have to, like, build 500 of something and then cross your fingers that 500 people want to buy it before you can afford to build anything else, you know, it gets a little cagey, you know?
Yeah. I'm always talking about my Noble preamp, which would be curious to know your thoughts of if you've encountered one.
I've only encountered them in the wild a few times. They seem like very well built piece of gear. I don't know the people who make it personally. I don't really have anything to say about it. It seems like a well-built piece of gear, and I know a lot of people like it.
Super well built. My understanding is the circuit is not necessarily revolutionary. It's just a tube sounds good.
Yeah.
Like that's the magic of it. A tube sounds good. It's got a custom powered transformer in it because it powers other pedals. I don't use it for that, but maybe that has something to do with it too. And at the end, there's a Jensen transformer, which I've actually been experimenting with. If I'm not using the XLR out, I can hang this off of it and then use this transformer as the output. And now I'm like, but it's such overkill. It's like really,
but once you own but once you have all the stuff sitting in the studio, I mean, it's always funny to me that people like will look at it that way, like it's overkill. It's like, well, what? I mean, aren't I supposed to enjoy this? You know what I mean? Like,
as a reviewer too, though, it's like, how do I? People are like, how does it sound? The Noble is the status symbol, and I got it before it was overhyped. But it's like, hey, I can't just put the Noble against this without 1,000 caveats because the Noble is a preamp. And that's like, this has to be coupled with a preamp. So now I have to be really conscious about what's on the other side of this. And now is that a fair comparison with and it's like two different things. Yeah. I mean, it's just hard to wrap your head around all the little intricacies and,
well, and also it's like, I think in, gain staging has become a very hypey term, and I think everybody's misusing it because it doesn't seem to mean what it meant to me coming up as an engineer in the 90s. But like understanding that like preamp is not a technical term. You can write preamp on anything you want that makes gain. There's a concept called nominal level, which just means about the same level as the other signals you're working with in a mixing or recording context. So the job of a preamp is to take a low-level signal, bring it up to nominal level so that it is about the same as the other signals you're working with, so that you can work with them more easily and so that you don't have signal-to-noise issues. And so, like, if you think about it, the Noble is called a preamp, right? But, like, then you're plugging into a DI, and then that has to go into a mic preamp, and that's going into like a recorder which has a preamp. It's everything has a preamp if you look at it the right way. And so it's just amplifier stages, and the idea mainly is like, do you know how to maximize your signal to noise ratio and maximize your bandwidth when you're adding gain to things? Because that's why like the stepped gain switch on a Neve sounds better than the fader. So if you can get the gain you need at the fader, if you can get it the way you want to hear and not have to use the fader, or like pulling the fader down really low because the thing is pegging the meter up there, it's just, you're not getting the best experience of sound quality or of like what it's like to mix something,
Yeah, which you have a great rant on. Did you put on YouTube? About Neve preamps, especially about how it's actually attenuating and like, so for people who want
it was
more.
A response to somebody else's video because somebody was like, use a pad and turn the gain up and it sounds better. And I was like, okay, this is a great example of when knowing how shit works can help, because that is true, but only under certain circumstances. And where the pad is in the circuit, whether it's an external pad or an internal pad, and what type of mic pre you're talking about, because a mic pre with a variable gain circuit is going to sound different when you're doing that than a mic pre with a switchable pad basically on the front, which is kind of how the Neves work. And then also because of the Neve thing, where on a 1073, that 0 point that's in between two of the medium gain stages, that's there because it's a stop to show you that you're switching in the second gain card. So one of the reasons that we used to pad stuff before going into the Neve is because you can go through twice as many Neve line amps, Yep. So if you want it to sound Neve-y, that's the way you do it. But doing that on an API doesn't work because that's not how APIs work. So it's not even just a matter of like expensive versus inexpensive gear. It's like APIs is just a variable gain circuit that, has a thing, and but the pad is on this side of the transformer. So if you want to get more of the transformer sound, you can pad it here, hit the transformer harder, and then, blah, blah, blah.
Or the people would throw pads on the outputs.
Yeah. Just to drive the whole thing harder.
Yeah.
I mean, because we used to do that in that video I talked about, like a thing we used to do that's a pain in the ass is like, the tape machine outs are normal to the tape ins of the console, but the tape ins have a different transformer than the mic in. And the tape in is just unity gain, so you can't add gain. So we would just patch the tape ins back to the mic inputs so you could mix through the mic circuits and really hit the transformers hard. And, now you're getting more of the sort of API rock sound, Yeah.
So, did you actually say, why do you prefer a passive DI on bass, at least?
Oh, why do I? Okay. I'm suspicious of the amplifier stage that's powered by 48 volts of phantom because there's very, very little current, and making low end sound good requires both voltage and current. And so I think like if you take the sort of original active DI design of like the Countryman, what's actually in there when you open it up, right? It's a single JFET preamp. So it's very similar to like what people might call the Echoplex preamp or the Tillman boost or, the Electro-Harmonix boosts. It's basically that. It's got kind of a lot of distortion. It's not amazing at low end. And it doesn't really have the current to deliver the low end that I would want. And so also to me, like as fussy as I am about keeping the impedance really high in electric guitar, I think hanging that transformer on the output of a P-Bass creates a nice little nose that you don't get when you use the active DI. The loading of the transformer, because what's the transformer? Maybe 100K tops, depending on the transformer. So 100K load on a P-Bass, think about what you know about the sound of different value pots on a passive pickup, and then imagine making a 100K pot. Not even a 100K pot, a 100K pot in parallel with a 200K pot. That's going to load down the top end, and it's going to create a little resonant peak. And so part of that Jamerson sound is passive DI on a P-Bass creates that little bit of nose that just happens to sit in a nice place where it doesn't catch too much of the finger noise, but it gets some of the attack of what you're playing. So is that a case for in this circumstance not using the Una or? Yeah, I mean, yeah. In that, if that's the sound you're going for, I wouldn't use one. I would get the best sounding transformer I could, and I would just plug the bass into that, and then plug that into a mic pre and call it a day.
Yeah. What is your I love the Una, by the way. I was curious. I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah, like there are times when I don't use it either. It's okay that we don't use it on everything. If I designed a piece of gear that should be on everything always, I would live in a much bigger house. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. No, totally. Okay, so we talked about a good transformer passive DI. Don't overthink it. Actually, some of the UTC, well, maybe it's not UTC. There are some old transformers out there that are not hip yet. There was one, I cannot remember what it was. It was a triad, but you could wire it in reverse. It was basically the same as the, anyway, whatever. That's a rabbit hole I don't have time to go down.
Yeah, I have a friend in Philadelphia who scours the internet for the specific old UTCs that you can do that with. And if you're interested in doing it, it's just a matter of looking at the primary and the secondary impedance. And one of them needs to be about 100K, and the other one should be pretty low, maybe 600 ohms or less. And if you can do that, then you can wire it with the 100K side towards the bass, and the other side you plug into a mic pre and call it a day.
So with the mic pre, do you have a pre preference, and are you also a mic pre mixing guy? If you're choosing kick goes API, snare goes that guy too?
I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I have, like, in my own collection here, I have a collection of random preamps, and it is because I think this sounds good on bass, and I think this sounds good on drums. But the experience I prefer when I'm making a record is a console experience, and so I'm kind of like, well, I would prefer to work at a studio that had a big working console so that I could just kind of have everything right there and have everything sort of in a similar sonic space than piecemealing everything. So like for instance, while I do prefer like an API 312, not 512, an API 312 style on bass, you know, if I went to a studio that had a Neve full of 1073s, I wouldn't bring a 312 with me. There's very few things that there's very few things that I care about enough to like bypass the desk, because I grew up working on desks. I think working on a desk is a really lovely way to make a record. Yeah. But like, I have a couple of Avalons that I'll bring around with me because they're very low noise for the amount of gain they create. And like, most low noise mic pre's sound kind of boring, and the Avalon is a good example of like a mic pre that still sounds good and interesting, but also is very low noise. And you know, it's most singers.
The U5?
I have a V5, but I use most of the time. That's what I brought on tour with Beatty. But cool. I have a U5 as well. I have both the U5 and the V5.
Sweet.
And they're both really good sounding. The V5 I like. It's a little quieter, and it's also got some extra like features that make it handy to just carry around with you if you're only going to carry one or two things with you. Yeah. But like, I like 1081s a little more than I like 1073s. But but if I went to a studio full of 1073s, then am I going to be like, maybe I had 1081s? You know what I mean? It's like,
right. Is it the sound or the EQ?
I like the EQ a lot better. There's like the preamp of the 1073 does seem to be a little tougher sounding, but you know, once you get out of your phase of trying to make everything sound big and tough, you realize like a 1081 is a little more flexible, and it still has some of that grit. And it's also always possible to make things sound harder. It's hard to make things sound cleaner and softer. Right. You know, like we did the Lizzy bonus tracks at Electric Lady, and they have a desk full of 1081s, and I was in heaven. It's one of the best sounding things I think I ever engineered. And it was because they had a good mic locker and a desk full of 1081s, and I just did everything on the desk, and it was great. I don't think I patched a single piece of outboard gear. I love that. Like, you know, because I don't, you know, I'll EQ on the way in now, but I only compress on the way in for stuff where I'm the producer, basically, because same. I know I'm able to commit to stuff, but I don't like to put that on other people. Like, I enjoy the finding out period of like, I crushed this thing going to tape and now I'm mixing, and it, you know, I enjoy working around my own creative decisions, but other people want to go back sometimes. And just to give them a break, it's like, I'll EQ a little bit on the way in because I've become a more gentle EQ person now. But I tend not to compress too much on the way in. I'll put an LA2 on the bass and only dig like 4 dB deep on it. You know?
But my number one pet peeve, I mean, I do the same thing. I will do an LA2A for about the same amount of reduction on my bass, which, you know, I have a Stam audio clone. But it's awesome. I love it. It's the best I'll ever touch. But man, my number one pet peeve as a player is walking into a studio and they're like, "Oh, we've got the stay level for you," and I'm like, "Awesome!" And then they just destroy me. Like, I cannot feel anything. I'm just like blah the whole time. That's my least favorite studio experience, and it happens a lot.
I think also engineers get a lot wrong when they try to impress musicians by focusing on like getting the mixed sound to the player. You know what I mean? But like,
yeah, who cares?
There's nothing more fun than playing in a room with people with amps on and just jamming and stuff like that. And like the musicians out in the studio have their own kind of emotional needs and requirements. And I'm always kind of like trying to focus on them when we're tracking, knowing that I got a good thing to tape, and we'll mix it later, you know? I mean, like, I tend to mix pretty fast, and I try to mix on the day of whenever I can. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to spend 10 years dialing in a bass sound. You know what I mean? I'm just going to get the people playing and, like, and just get a good bass sound, and then, you know, make it great in the mix later.
Well, I'm a big dummy, and I feel vindicated that my favorite pre in here is a 3124 API with Melcore op amps from Scott Lieber. So I'm like, yes!
Yeah, those are good. I don't like them on drums the way other people like them on drums. I really don't like them on vocals unless you're doing a really rock kind of thing. But they're hard to beat for bass, and like, and and maybe like the close mics on the drums are pretty good on them. It's always funny because it's like I value more knowing what's good about each one rather than like having a real preference. You know, It's like I've kind of like ended up being a Neve person just because they're so versatile. Like there's nothing that a 1081 doesn't do well. Whereas I don't know that a 312 does vocals all that well, you know, like, especially if you're trying to make a very delicate sounding, intimate sounding kind of record, it wouldn't be my first choice. But at the same time, like when we were tracking for the Lizzy record, we were working at Nuffer Ranch, the studio owned by the pedal steel player in the band, Tyler Nuffer. And he had, in his studio, he chose some great rivers and, which are Neve-ish.
1073-ish, yeah.
And, some Dakings. And I know Jeff Daking a bit just from the gear business, and he's a lovely man. And it was the first time I was really working professionally with like the Daking preamp, and it's great. It's Trident-ish in its design. But again, it's like, it's low noise. It sounds good on a lot of things. You know, there was a few things I ended up putting back in the Neves, and there's a few things I took out of the Neves and put in the Dakings. And, you know, I'll spend a little bit of time swapping like that, but I also try to do a lot of that R&D on my free time. You know, like, I always try to get to the studio a day before if anybody will pay for it, or just have some of that gear sitting around my house so that, like, you know, you can make a quick decision about it. You don't have to labor over it, because once you open the can of worms in the studio and you have 6 people talking about what mic pre sounds good on something, it's hard to get out of that headspace and get back to just a creative headspace. I like to keep the band in the tracking room playing. I like to get, you know, the best sounds I can get quickly. You know, like at Nuffer Ranch, he doesn't have a lot of outboard EQ in there. So I just did preamp right to tape, and it was cool. I thought back to like my admiration for Al Schmidt, and I said, well, if I need to EQ something before I instantiate a plugin, I'll walk out there, I'll move the mic around, I'll change the mic. And like, you know, we were using this big 215 Airline amp that Mason had for the bass, the bass player's Michael Livermento. And I ended up like, I had a FET 47 on the front of it, and it didn't sound amazing. And then I just, in moving the mic around, I just stuck my head around the back, and just for some reason, it was an open back cabinet, and the back of the cabinet sounded better. So we put the mic back there. And so that whole record is like, you know, an Airline 215 amp pointed 45 degrees this way up to his face. And then the FET 47 is just kind of tucked in between the back of the cab and the floor.
Was there any weird well, I guess there wouldn't have been, because you weren't using the DI as well.
Well, but also it's just like in that, if you're coming front to back versus a speaker, it's a 180 degree phase flip, so it doesn't matter that much. You can just flip it, and one works and the other doesn't. There's more problems when you're doing like multiple mics on one thing and they're like not fully equidistant from each other. That's when you'll get like phase problems you can't sort. You know, putting a mic on the back of a cabinet, yeah, it's 180 degrees out, and there's a button for that, you know.
Yeah. How did you, man, this is a big question. How did you kind of learn what good is, or what your definition of good is? And I'm thinking mics and preamps specifically, or even DIs, like we've said. Like, how?
I think there's 2 main ways you do it. You got to listen to a lot of records, and you got to, like, if you have studio speakers in your studio, you have to listen to records on those speakers, and then just trial and error. Like, you know, when I was coming up in the 90s, you know, we had some digital technology that was very handy, but the idea that you could constantly reference your favorite record to get your bass tone didn't exist. You had to scrutinize it, you know. Maybe somebody brought a CD or whatever. Maybe you always had Led Zeppelin 4 in the CD player or whatever. But like, you didn't have an infinite resource. So if somebody said, can we do a Jamerson sounding bass thing? You had to kind of know what that sounded like, and know what that sounds like coming through the speakers, and know what it sounds like soloed, which is usually different than what it sounds like in the mix. And I think mostly it's just trial and error. Like, I ended up playing, like, I play a lot of instruments, although I'm not really virtuosic on anything, but I play guitar, drums, bass, piano, and it just happened that way. because whenever I had free time in the studio, I would pick up the bass and I would play the bass and I would say, okay, like one of my mentors growing up was this bass player, Pete Donnelly, who I think is one of the most underappreciated people in the music business. He's an absolutely amazing bass player amid all his other talents. And when Pete would dial in a really great bass sound and then everybody would go to lunch, I would stay in the studio 5 extra minutes and pick up the bass and put on the cans and say, okay, how does it feel to play the sound that I heard coming through the thing? What does it feel like in the cans? What does it feel like on the bass? You know, like trying to just build a library of all these things. And then it's like, at some point you just have to also trust yourself, you know, like, I don't think you can go chasing references too much. I think it's nice to have like a general idea. I like it when people will give me like a rough, when people say something like, I want it to be Motown-y or Beatles-y or whatever, or even like, I want it to sound like, you know, new wave records or whatever. I like a bit of that because it helps you understand it's shorthand for what somebody's going for. But I certainly won't like get out a Motown record and A/B to see if I nailed it.
Right,
like, I'm more interested if it creates the feeling for me. And if it creates the feeling for me and if it sounds good, hopefully it also creates the feeling for somebody else. And, you know, like some of that stuff you can leave to the mastering engineer. If they really want it to sound more like a Motown track, you know, they can sculpt the mix a bit at mastering. I don't really like, I don't like too specific of references, you know. I like
also you said, sorry to bring us back. You said something earlier about the B15. How were you driving a B15 to break up how you liked it? Like, to me, a lot of these speakers are so rattly that you can't actually like are you like trying to juice something on the front end into it and keep the volume low? Or I was surprised at how clean it was.
Yeah, I mean, you must have a really good one, because most of the ones I've encountered are the speakers rattling, the cabinet is rattling, the tubes are distorting. If you're trying to get any kind of like air moving out of it, it just kind of broke up too much for me, even just plugging a P bass right into it. You know?
It broke up too much.
Yeah.
Man, mine's clean. All right, I need to put mine in a museum or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a thing about Ampegs, like both SVTs and B15s, is like they suffer from that thing where there are good ones and bad ones. And I've come to mistrust them as a whole just because I don't want to know. Whereas like even a relatively mediocre twin to me is still a better bass amp, because it's a lot more predictable. And like Pete has a really good sound. I think his is a B12, but he has a really, really good sounding B12, and it is amazing, and it's good on everything he uses it on. But like, there's a couple B15s that people I know in LA have here, and every time I try to use it, it's like, this thing sucks. Like, why am I?
Mine's also a 70s B15, so I can hit the ultra low switch, which on an SVT it's a mid scoop, and you know, various things can happen there. But on mine, it gives it a little bit more bottom, but it's like it attenuates it. And then I can bring it up, and then I'm like, everybody says not to hit this, but I'm going to hit this because this is pretty sweet.
Well, I think it's cool. Like, they're very. One of the reasons I shy away from Ampeg bass amps in general is just like wherever the EQ is positioned, it just doesn't seem to work for me personally. Either the sound I'm trying to get as an engineer or when I'm playing, I don't like it. But I think if they've made that amp and if that EQ switch sits in a place that works for you and your playing, I think you should count yourself lucky, because like that's just a free bit of low end that you can have as long as it like works for your playing, you know?
Yeah, and we get back to the status symbol conversation. Like, if they're like, oh, you can show up with a B15, and I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, I love that, you know?
Sometimes sometimes I'll do the status symbol stuff just to not talk about it. Like, I remember one time, a very famous producer who will go unnamed, they had to do a session out of this studio that was kind of still being built, and the studio had a limited mic locker. And they wanted to do a thing where they had a drum kit set up and a guitar amp set up. They wanted to have everything set up so they could just work, because they only wanted to hire me for like one day to set everything up, and then the producer was going to drive the session. And so I said, okay. And I looked at the pile of mics they had, and there wasn't a huge pile. And I ended up putting the 47 as the drum overhead, because they didn't have anything else. They didn't have a lot of good sounding drum mics. So I said, to get a good drum sound, we need to do a very overhead focused drum sound. So we're going to do the 47 over the drums so that the drums sound fantastic. You can walk out of the session with the drums. And I put like a 414 on the vocal. And they were like, yeah, but the singer kind of wants to see the 414. Or sorry, wants to see the 47. And I was like, here's what's probably going to happen, though. You're going to track all this shit with scratch vocals. Then you're going to go and start to chop it up and do some mixing. And then you're going to bring a singer back in to do it. And so the better move is to put the 47 over the drums now, so the drums are fabulous. Because we all know you're not going to keep these vocals. And if you are keeping a scratch vocal, it's because it was a fantastic performance and not because it sounded amazing. And usually that's a kind of cool tone in the recording anyway. And, you know, but again, it's like status symbol. The vocalist wants to sing on a 47.
You can't take a photo of it. So,
yeah.
Okay. I want to be mindful of our time, but there's so much more I want to cover.
I can't believe we already talked for an hour. I told you I can talk a lot.
I love it. I love it. I'd love to go another like 20 minutes if you're okay with that. But we'll feel it. Okay. Bass EQ. Are you I know it varies so much, but let's just say a P bass with round wounds plugged in, whatever. Are you boosting or cutting like 450? Are you adding low end? Like, what do you?
I'm very much a cut EQ person these days. Mm-hmm. And with bass, what I like to do is, I'm still kind of a Pultec on the bass person. Like, I just do the nice little gentle wide boost at whichever one sounds better, 100 or 60 or whatever. And for where I'm carving out the mid-range, it kind of depends on the tone and the part. I like to keep a bit of like high end in the bass just so it's easier to make it feel present in the mix. But in my mixes, there's usually there's build up for me more like 200-300 than 500. For some reason, it's like when I'm working on my own shit, it's always like almost everything could lose a little bit of 200 and it would sound better. But yeah, I've become kind of a cut only EQ person, with the exception of using a Pultec to add some low end to the bass. I'm still waiting on someone to make a legitimate Pultec at my feet in a pedal board. It's pedal if it was just the low end circuit, you could probably fit most of it in there if it was just the low end. Yeah, it doesn't even have to be tube. You've got all that Motown EQ adjacent stuff. Yeah. I guess there was a different one that was solid state that kind of worked the same way. But that's Lang, all I want. Lang. Yeah. Yeah, Lang. Which they're remaking some of that kind of stuff under Heritage Audio. I haven't heard the reissues yet, but Lang's I actually like a little more than Pultec's. I just say Pultec because that's the status symbol. Similar. Well, and it's also like more people know what the Pultec is than what the Lang is. I don't want to seem too elitist by being like, I use the Lang EQ. I need the Lang, right? They're very similar circuits. So with that on bass, kick drum, what are you reaching? Are you cutting a lot of that 400 area on drums? Or I don't tend to EQ the drums a lot. I like to add a little bit of air to the drums. So I might be adding in general like 12 to 15K, like a little shelf up there, just to bring up the rest of the high end and make it a little airy. But again, the kick drum I kind of carve out like per track. It's not always the same thing. I don't really have go-tos in that way. I really believe strongly in like listening and like starting with no EQ and trying to get a basic mix together with no EQ. And then if I'm going to put an EQ on the kick drum, I don't solo it. I just put the EQ on the kick drum and I work with it with the rest of the drums, because the EQ on the kick drum can mess with the phase of a lot of other things, you can lose a lot of meat on the snare drum because you added so much meat to the kick drum. I mean, this is why people end up having to gate things and like use tons of processing. It's like, if you're not careful, I'm like a 5 mics on the drums kind of person, and it's not always the same 5 mics, but I feel like if I haven't done it in 5 mics, there's something I could improve. There's something that I'm not understanding about what I'm going for. Like on a 4-piece drum kit, it's just hard to justify more than 5 mics in that small area when everything is that loud. Like, I do most of my work with just overhead and kick out. And
That's what I was about to ask. Are you forming your drum sound around that overhead?
Yeah.
And the kick? Never.
Yeah, basically it's
close
like
mics.
No, the close mics I don't even pay a lot of attention to until I need them. Like, and if it's my own work where I'm in charge, I don't even use them. Like in my drum kit at home, it's like kick out, overhead, floor tom, and then maybe a snare top sometimes. Like the overhead is it's like a stereo overhead situation, but it's not a stereo microphone. So I get a little bit of breadth out of the way I do stereo over the drums. But again, if it's a 4-piece drum kit and you bring that mono overhead just down low as is comfortable for the drummer, then you listen. And if you want it to be bigger sounding with more room stuff, you bring it up. And if you want it to be tighter sounding, you bring it down. And usually, like, if you get down to like drummer's nose era, it basically sounds like close mics. Like, if you put a pair of headphones on and hold a microphone in your hand and put it, 2 inches from the floor tom and 5 inches from the floor tom, it sounds a little better 5 or 6 inches away. It's just that then it's getting a lot of other spill. And so we put it closer to get isolation, but it's not like a thing. I always say this as a joke at live shows. I never tell the drummer to like play the kick drum, because I can guarantee that one thing that will never happen during a show is that we're going to mute all the other microphones and we're just going to listen to the drummer playing kick drum only through only the kick drum mic. Right? It just doesn't happen. And if you need that level of focus, I think there's like some development you could be doing in your own time, because I don't think you need to do that ever. I don't think it's a good thing to do to a musician. I don't think it's a good use of the limited amount of time you have at a sound check. But so similar. So what I do is turn on the overhead, find a good spot for where it balances with the room and with the drummer and kind of gets close to the level of dryness that you're looking for. And then just listen to what you need. And if you need a little bit of, sometimes you get a ton of subby stuff out of the kick that way, but you end up needing the attack of it. So in those days, you put a D12 on it and, it's like a more mid-rangey sound. Then sometimes, you're not getting as much low end out of the kick drum. So on those days, you put a FET 47 on the kick out and just move the mic to kind of get the best phase relationship possible. Whether it's 180 or not, you still should fine tune it within there. Figure out which one is closer to being good and then move it a little bit, because you'll be amazed at.
Are you using your ears or are you measuring for this, or both?
Like I'll do a quick kind of rough measurement in the room and then just use my ears,
Cool.
You want the mics to be kind of equidistant or in halves is easier math. So if it's, if the kick drum, if kick out is this close to the kick drum, I'll turn the mic. If, close to me is 6 inches. I try not to get closer than 6 inches to anything, even a vocal, because I just don't think it ever actually sounds great. You have to do so much processing to get it to sound good. If you just back it off a little bit, it sounds great. So if the kick is 6 inches and then, this mic is coming down here, you kind of measure sort of from the center of the drum just for convenience. And if you find that it's like, close enough to halfway, to half or to a whole, then I'll just move it there. And usually it sounds better, And then you can just check on the console. But I don't use like phase alignment tools because, like, how do those even work? Like because of balanced signals, you have 180-degree flips, right? And I feel like anything else you're doing is just destined to be weird, because like phase has a frequency component, right? And so like if you're doing these like micro shifts to get one frequency perfectly in tune, I think you're doing a disservice necessarily. You obviously can't be listening to all of that stuff, but you can listen to a 180 flip and just go better one, better two, you know.
And then close mics, are you adding high end or sculpting them? I know you said you're not really soloing them. Are they just there and then you kind of do stuff for it if you think it's lacking later? Or
yeah, I mean, what if I look back on it, I tend to do sort of less EQ on the overhead and the kick out and the snare top because I like to keep those sounds very natural feeling. And I think you get into too much EQ, it just doesn't feel natural anymore. But I will scoop the toms out a bit in a more like 90s kind of scoop tom style where it's just big lows and big highs on the close mics of the toms when I end up with them. Because if I'm reaching for the fader labeled floor tom to turn it up, that's what I want to turn up, is the sort of big 90s floor tom. And if you think about it, like think of like a Motown floor tom. It's like you don't actually want more of that in the mix. There's a perfect amount of it in the overhead. The only thing you might want more of is if you were riding the floor tom playing rock and roll, or if the floor tom was muted a little bit and you needed just a little more oomph out of it. So I tend to use like dynamics on the toms and just scoop them out a bit. Like I have D190s. I fell in love with the AKG D190 for a couple of years, and I bought 5 or 6 of them before they kind of became too expensive. Like, it's only worth $100. Like, don't buy a D190 if you're not getting it for $100. But if you can get a good one for $100, it actually is a really handy, really cool sounding mic that's sort of 57-ish, but has a little bit more of like an AKG kind of vibe, a little more hi-fi sort of vibe to it.
So what's your snare pick?
Oh, the 201.
Okay.
I mean, I'll put anything on a snare drum if I have to, because again, I don't love the close mic anyway. But the two things I enjoy putting close to a snare drum are a Bayer 201 and a Coles 4038. Like 4038, if you can manage to get one in there and you tweak the pattern right so that you're actually nulling some of the hi-hat, right? The 4038 is amazing. That's the thing I got directly from Andy Kravitz. He had 3 4038s. He had 2 Coles ones, and he had one STC. The predecessor of the Coles 4038 was the polished brass STC one. He had one of those, and it was a little dinged up already anyway, so he just used it as snare top, and it's amazing.
That's pretty cool.
It's really, really good. And you can use the pattern to your advantage, actually. Like, people get scared that you're doing figure 8 on a snare drum, but the snare drum itself is so relatively loud. And if you can get the hi-hat in the null part of the pattern, and maybe hopefully the rack tom in the null part of the pattern, like, there's not enough volume coming into the back of the microphone relative to how loud the snare drum is for the pattern to really create that big of a problem for you. So, like, I even have some cheap ribbon mics that I just use on snare top from time to time because it's so cool. But
are you nervous about sound pressure level? Like,
no, ribbons can handle all that. What ribbons don't like is wind. Sound pressure level ribbon, like they use ribbon mics to record nuclear explosions in the 50s because they can actually handle incredible SPL levels. They just can't handle wind. So, like, you don't want to use a ribbon mic in front of the hole of a kick drum. But if you want a ribbon mic on your kick drum, if you back it off a foot and kind of bring it up a little bit, sort of almost to where some people might put like a mono mic, you know, a 44 out there aiming at the kick drum is a great kick drum sound.
Right.
I wouldn't get too close to the kick drum because that head can generate a fair amount of wind even with no hole in it, but certainly keep it away from the hole. But yeah, the SPL of a ribbon on a snare drum is fine. There's no wind down there. So
yeah,
that's fine. You know,
what is your overhead pick? And you said you did stereo overheads instead of just mono overheads, or how are you deciding?
I have a gag that I've settled on now that that I'm still trying to kind of gatekeep, but I'm not the only person to do it. So I'll tell you a little about it, which is that I think people have gone crazy with multiple overheads and multiple rooms. And I think that it's really doing a disservice to your sound. I think almost nothing sounds better on a drum kit than a mono large diaphragm condenser overhead. Like something like a 67 or an 87 or, you know.
I agree. This is my mono overhead.
I don't even mind AKG style versus Neumann style capsules. I just like to make sure I have a really good sounding large diaphragm overhead. And then the way I get stereo is to just make a little MS array with just whatever else is laying around. Usually, if I can, I'll do it with a little ribbon mic. So, like if you see any pictures of the Lizzy at Electric Lady sessions, I did it there, and I used a Royer, which I don't really like the Royers that much, but it's figure 8, and you can make an MS array out of it, and it's easy.
So you're adding that, you're using the condenser you were using, and you're adding the figure 8 to it to make that the MS array, right?
Yeah.
And for people who might not know, that's you dupe the track and phase invert, and then you keep it down. You have to put the mono mic a little higher, and then you can bring all 3 faders up for the stereo thing, right?
Yeah, and then you can control the width of it in mix, which is nice. And what I like about it is it's the only way to do a stereo overhead that I don't feel like compromises the mono sound. Because I always think it's funny when you see a mono overhead and then, 2 451s on either side, and then they also want to have stereo rooms. And it's just like, it's too much information and it's too much shit. And the drums are not actually incredibly stereo as an instrument. You want a little bit of breadth and a little bit of space, and you kind of want the floor tom to feel a little bit over here and the hi-hat to feel a little bit over here. But if you're going to hard pan them, and if you want to get a real stereoscopic image of the drums, you're going to have to do that with close mics anyway. So I don't know why you would do stereo overheads close in the drums. And stereo room is kind of similar. Like, it would have to be a really specific situation to make me do that. Like, I can imagine doing stereo room if I'm only doing mono over the drums, but even so, it's like you end up with so little of that in the mix. I think you're working really hard for it and spending a lot of time and money on it when you should really be focused on that overhead sound, because that's what people are going to hear and people are going to feel,
Yeah, this is so in my lane of what I've been into lately. We had my friend Dwayne Lundy on really early in the podcast, and he kind of has a very similar spiel. And then I have basically the same setup as what you said behind me. I'm not doing the MS thing, but I'm doing the wide overheads, but like it's all mono and then a little bit of width in the side for the mixes, and then I call it a day. I'm done.
Yeah.
But I chose to have the everything plugged in thing. Make that choice for me because I have that big AEA holder array thing.
Oh yeah.
So I'm like, well, I can put them both here and a mono in the center. Everything's measured out, and I'm done. I'm not going to worry about it. Not going to lose sleep anymore. I'm moving on. So on the Lizzy McAlpine record, taste wise, things I observed: the slower big bass, the, like you said, kind of the pillowiness of the kick drum was obvious without it being like super subby, and then very dry drums. Is dry drums what you've always been into?
No.
And the 90s toms. I literally wrote down in my notes, like, toms are really big. Like, surprisingly
it goes
big.
song by song because some of that was done. So basically she had recorded the whole album with Greg Kohler, who's John Bryan's engineer, who I know a little bit, but we're not close friends or anything, but I used to work for John a little, so I know Greg from then. So song by song, some of those are Greg and some of those are me. Mine are like the first couple of tunes on the record where it's a little more kind of spacious and dry in that way, like dry but spacious. Greg's are the ones that are generally much more close mic'd sounding and scooped out.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
And I don't not like that sound. I just didn't think it worked for that material. And I sort of let myself go in long phases of engineering where like I did my duty to get huge 90s drum sounds in the 90s. And, now I'm just on a different trip for a while. And who knows, like if you interview me in another 5 years, I might be back on close mics and damping all the toms, but I'm just going through a phase where I like things to sound a lot more natural. And,
yeah. And
I also, just as a contrarian, right? I'm just a contrarian. So like I used to put tea towels on my drums and close mic things. And then when that started to become popular and I wasn't being given credit for inventing it or anything, I I moved on, and I was like, well, I just don't want to do that because now everybody's doing it.
Right.
When you're doing something that's relatively unique in the space, almost anything is cool. And when you're doing something that everybody else is doing, almost nothing is cool. You know what I mean? Like, once every studio you go into has a 47 on the vocal, what does it even mean anymore? Don't you want to do something different, if only to have it be different, you know? Like, and I really do believe in that kind of stuff, and like, it's one reason I've never vibed with Nashville, because it seems like a place where, even more so than in the regular world, you're constantly being bullied to just do what is currently cool. And I just don't think that's a cool way to make records. I think, like, if you do anything different, they don't want you to do it until somebody else has already done it and had a hit with it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like,
I love that.
Never forget that they ran Willie Nelson out of town on a rail in the 60s. Because he was too weird. And then once he had a bunch of hits, everybody started putting feathers in their cowboy hats and calling themselves outlaws and welcoming him back into the, you know, Nashville community or whatever. But it's like,
well, so what's next? Because I see the cool LA thing being, like you said earlier, mixed fidelity.
Yeah.
That's getting really cool. I see everybody wearing big headphones. The Ryan Beatty thing did that. You're choosing.
Well, that wasn't. I would say that's me and Mason more than Beatty. Like,
okay, well, like, so that's what I see is cool now. The McGee thing is also part of
Mason,
that,
right? Mason did that.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I think they shared some musicians or something, or there's a crossover. There's another guy named Dijon that.
Oh yeah, Richter's in Dijon's band. Yeah.
So I think that was the crossover, and Dijon works with McGee.
Here's what happened with the headphone thing. If you want to know why it,
I want to know. We finally arrived on what all the cool LA stuff
is. The headphone thing is just something that me and Mason talked about, because it's like, I think in-ears are goofy. I don't think they sound good. I think it's a weird conceit where you're trying to conceal from the world that you're wearing headphones, especially because it sounds worse and is worse for your ears. And if you don't like the sound of a wedge, I think you should just wear headphones, right? And you can have way better sounding headphones than you can have way better sounding in-ears. And like, in-ears had to me as a vibe of like, it's a stadium show that's more about showmanship and about the video wall and all this fucking bullshit that I think is stupid. Like, you know, one of the tours we were on last year is just like 100% of that. Everything is to the click. Everybody is on in-ears. Every track is doubled from the playback rig. You know, the video wall is synced. The mixer is synced. The front of house mix is synced. All the moves are synced. That everything, the band could literally stop and the show would basically go on, except there wouldn't be somebody going like this. You know what I mean? And I just think that's so, I'm not mad at people like Taylor Swift when they do that, because the identity of what they're trying to do is about that sort of like stage show kind of vibe. The music is produced in a way that does not indicate to you that it is like a band jamming and playing those tunes. I do get really pissed off when I see a band that is supposed to be like a real roots rock band and everything is synced and everybody's on a click and there's a track in the session that's telling you when the chorus is coming up. It's like all that goofy stuff is just so stupid when you're trying to fake reality with it, right? Yep. Again, like the Swifter dives into a stage and is on a rocket sled under it and comes out with another outfit on the other side. Like, that's an amazing spectacle. And I'm very pleased that that kind of show exists and that kind of music exists for people who like it. But if you're like a roots rock band, you know, and you're doing everything except the rocket sled, I think you're actually missing a beat and you're not letting yourself be real. So what Mason and I said on that tour is like, there's a lot of pressure on Beatty to do like a more produced kind of tour. And Mason and I were just like, fuck that. We're going to just sit the band in a circle. We're going to play the tunes. We tried to have a wedge for him and he's just a very quiet singer and a wedge was kind of impractical. And he also just didn't like the sound of the wedge. And so we said, we'll just use cans. And so we just got him a pair of cans. We used a wired headphones amp because like you can't really get a great cans mix off a 9-volt battery no matter how hard you try. There's always RF at these stadiums, so if you're sensitive and if you're trying to get yourself immersed in the music and you're wearing a belt pack and like there's every time you walk around. Yep. That's bullshit. Just wear wired cans. There's wires running all over the stage. Why is it weird to wear wired cans?
And you think you don't necessarily care about the hearing protection aspect of that?
Of what? Of in-ears?
Of in-ears versus headphones.
In-ears are terrible for your ears. And nobody can convince me otherwise.
Really?
Like, it's a sealed environment. Everybody knows that there's open back cans and there's closed back cans.
Right.
Open back cans create less ear fatigue. And it's because they put less SPL into your ears, and there's more room for the air to escape, right? So, call me a fucking crazy person, but you plug your ears, right, with a seal so that no sound can get in. And then you put a speaker in there, and you turn that speaker up, right? Everybody I know who's deaf wears in-ears, right? Like, I believe them to be really bad for your ears. I'm happy to be schooled by an audiologist about it, but the only possible protection is that you could turn them down more, right?
It's possible. But who actually does that?
Yeah, exactly. It's possible that using in-ears, because they're sealing out some of the background noise, that you could put less SPLs into your ears. But nobody does that when they're on a stage, right?
Are you doing any kind of earplug, any kind of whatever? Or are you just like, here we are, I make music?
No, I just try to create a reasonable amount of volume. Yeah. Like,
also
when I'm
true.
mixing, my mixes top out at like 88, like they're not loud.
Me too.
Like, but it feels loud because I know,
because you know how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't want to be too arrogant about it, but it's like people leave that show feeling like they had a beautiful sonic experience, and at no moment in the show is there a huge SPL crush. I can do it with a relatively small PA. I can do it with a relatively small amount of gear. It's just about getting good sounds on stage and using compression well. And a lot of times, the only time it looks like rocket science to people is when they're used to what live mixes look like. But anybody who's used to what a studio mix looks like sees what I do and they go, oh, you're just mixing it like we're in a studio. And I go, yeah. Like the way like a lot of live people have come to mix, where it's like huge amounts of kick drum pushing so much low end through all this, through all these like subs and like all these bad sounding close mics. It's like, what do you need all that isolation for? I did the Beatty show was maybe 14 inputs. And there's 6 people on stage, 7 people on stage. I used like 3 mics on the drums. We built a really cool DI rig from Michael Libramento. So we went back and forth because he and I didn't always fully agree on which sounded better. So we kind of just mixed it up so that everybody got to win. He has a Benson head that he really likes. And so we just took the DI out of the Benson head some nights.
Is this guitar or bass?
He's playing bass.
Okay, cool.
And then I used a Shure SR107 EQ, and a DBX 160, and I built him like a little channel strip on stage in a rack box. And I took the DI out of that, and then he just used the amp for stage level some nights. So depending on the night of the show, it was one or the other. Because he and I are close friends and we talk about it a lot. And I think sometimes it's fun, you don't always have to fully agree about stuff. We did 30 dates or whatever, so we can try it your way, we try it my way. So
right.
Which one we don't like,
Man, I was playing Railbird Festival. You weren't at that one, but
that's like the one I didn't go. Yeah.
I'm going. We're sound checking, whatever, and we show up at the call time, which is not the real call time, and then I'm like the only person that I'm like losing my stuff to go see is Ryan Beatty. It's happening at the same time. So I had little grandma in a go-kart or whatever take me down there, me and my pregnant wife. So I guess it was the first show that my specimen heard, but we're right in front of the stage. And he was aware of his audience and all of the like people waiting to see country headliner were packed into the front. Those were the only people there because it was the first act of the day on main stage though. So, I don't want to be a lot of people didn't get it, but
sure.
Kate and I were like losing our minds because we knew every word. We knew exactly what it was doing. And then he covered Neon Moon, and then all the people were like, "Oh, amazing! This is the best thing ever." Yeah. He was like, "I have to because it's a country festival or whatever." But
Yeah, I forget why I didn't go do Railbird. There was like some conflict I had or whatever. I did the other one. What's the one outside of Nashville?
Not Bonnaroo.
Yeah, Bonnaroo.
Stagecoach.
I did the Bonnaroo show. Yeah, I mean, that tour was incredible, and I wanted to show, I wanted to use it as an opportunity to show people, like, you don't have to do what the establishment is telling you to do. You know, if you're a baby band and you're trying to get on a festival, everybody tries to bully you into this way of using backline and this way of not caring about how you sound, and everything is about getting on and off really quick, and you got to run back and forth across the stage like you're Mick Jagger. And again, like, I'm not mad at people for whom that fits, you know what I mean? Like, but I think insisting that everybody do it that way, that everybody have that dumb Beta 52 kick drum sound, that like everybody be on in-ears, and now they're trying to get rid of guitar amps. It's just to make the lives of the live engineers a little easier. And I don't think that our job is actually that hard. Like, it's time consuming and it's challenging, but it's supposed to be challenging in a fun way. I was the only crew on that Beatty run. I set up every piece of gear every night. I carried the piano in by myself. That was my little piano that we brought because I wanted to have a real piano and nobody wanted to pay for it. So I have this short piano and we just brought that. And I built in mics on the inside and a DI on the inside with a contact mic. And, you know, and I set up all that gear every night. We couldn't find wedges that we liked the sound of. So I got Fender to give us some of their full range cabinets, because it's basically a powered wedge in a box that just looks like a Fender amp, but it has a little bit of tone control so that the player can reach over and adjust some tone control and have some volume and tone control for their own monitor mix without having to talk to the monitor engineer.
I love
and because
that.
we did it that way, I brought an analog monitor mixer and ran it on the side of stage with some real nice preamps and some nice compression and EQ, running everything before it even got to the front of house. And we ran them, so we ran our own monitors. There was no monitor person. And it was the best.
Do you compress your drum? I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
Do you compress drums very much? Overheads?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
It's a lot. Yeah.
A lot.
I mean,
okay.
it's not supposed to sound like a lot. I don't actually like the sound of crushing drums anymore, but I think it's a fair amount of compression. Yeah. Like, especially live. I think one of the reasons that live gigs don't sound good is because people don't know how to do like gentle, true, like gain control style leveling. Like, I mean, like I brought an SSL bus compressor with me on that Ryan tour. And it's like the whole mix is being pulled down 10 dB at any given time. I'm just doing the SSL mix bus thing the way anybody would set up, slow as possible, dig deep, you know, it sounds great live. But
this is all music to my ears. I'm even looking at, I got into like the best things I could afford. So I have a bunch of Stam clones, which, you know, he drives me up a wall in the way you order stuff. But when it gets here, you're like, it's pretty good. Yeah. So that's basically my entire outboard chain. I run everything through this Stam SSL bus compressor, as does everyone in history ever.
Yeah, like the thing it does is great and it's really helpful. And I don't know why more live shows don't sound better, because now you could have all that technology, you know?
Well, it's just kick, snare, vocal. That's the most annoying festival mix ever, where it's like, people are like, are you using a P bass or are you using a jazz bass? And I'm just like, I'm lucky if I'm in the mix, and we should stop acting like it's, do I have a 2 pickup bass or a 1 pickup bass? It's an engineering thing. It's a choice, and they want it to, you know, the high end of the kick and the snare and the vocal to go as long as they can. And there you go. And,
I got in a lot of trouble on some of those runs, especially the festival dates, because I'm like a festival stage manager's worst nightmare, because I just refuse to play that game. I don't think it takes any more time to do it the way I do it, but it takes a lot more care and attention.
Yep.
And like, you know, like we didn't want the drums on a riser, and everybody's like, you gotta have the drums on a riser. And I'm like, no, we're putting 5 mics on a 4-piece drum kit. If you can't get it out there and get it set up, if it's staged in 25 seconds, 30 seconds, why are there 80 stagehands here? right?
Exactly.
Like, there's 80 stagehands here. I don't want a riser, period. Like, I just don't understand how, like, the sort of corporate festival infrastructure has become far more important than, like, the experience of the musicians on. Everybody I know who plays festivals hates playing festivals. And I wish, like, the people in charge of, like, Railbird and Coachella and Bonnaroo really understood, like, how miserable an experience it is to go and do those shows. And that without a lot of fuss or muss, if you just sort of changed your perspective and changed your attitude, you could make it a much more enjoyable experience, you know, and it wouldn't really cost any more or take any more time. But it's like, you got to get some of these bullshit sound companies out of the way, because all they want is for it to be fast and easy, because they don't give a shit about your band. And if you can't afford to bring your own person who gives a shit about your band, you're fucked. And it's like, and even when you can afford to bring someone who gives a shit about your band, I spend a lot of my time arguing with the stage manager, arguing with the front of house person, arguing with the monitor person, because they just don't want to do it a different way. And it's like,
yeah, I was TMing a lot for that too. And so that was basically my job. I was the only person that knew enough about pro audio to kind of have it out with people. My experience was also that, like, we played Bonnaroo, which it was probably the same Bonnaroo you did, but we were on a little side stage, and I saw a guy, a monitor engineer, cut off a 4-piece, basically a cappella group, also from LA. They were in a bunch of Scary Pockets videos one time. Cut them off for going 30 seconds over during their closer, it just boop. And there were all of 10 people in the audience. So I was like, okay, know who I'm dealing with here. Like, I understand why these rules exist, but I'm like, okay, everything's very cut and dry, whatever. Get to Railbird and see the same guy. And so I'm like, okay, same guy, know what to expect here. Well, they couldn't figure out, we had tracks, but we didn't want to run a computer. So we were running tracks off an SB404 and doing triggers and risers and playing them. They couldn't, they kept acting like, oh, your thing's busted. We can't get in the system. Whatever. And I'm looking over because Adam Duritz just showed up to see us on side stage. And I'm like, this is our whole show. Like, this is all of our transition points, and we play old radio stuff and whatever. And these guys were just like, we're just going to have to go without it. We're going to have to go without it. My pedal board, they couldn't figure out something with it. It could have been my fault. But, you know, the only way to get something done is and I'm not an angry person, and I never do this, I threw my pedal board, and then I looked at the guy and I was like, have you changed the cables yet to the DI? And they're like, no. And they're like, it's so unlikely the XLR is going to go down. And I go, change the fucking cables in front of Adam Duritz. And they change the cables. We are 2 minutes into our set time. Change them. Thing comes through. And then I look and I go, we're going right now. And we started playing the show. And it was awesome. But, like, it's like every time you show up at these places, you have to be ready to fight the whole time. You're just fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting.
I mean, ultimately, like, I used to mix for Meshell and Ndegeocello, and
amazing,
in, like, maybe 2010 era, I worked for her for a few years. One of the most amazing musicians I've ever worked for. Her band is always fantastic. She's a wonderful person, an amazing musician. You know, eventually, her and her manager kind of had to fire me because I just was arguing so much with everybody we encountered. But it really was because I just, like, you know, I think maybe my tact could have used a little bit of work, and that was, like, an important moment for me where, like, losing a good gig because you're an asshole is, like, an important wake-up call sometimes. But
absolutely.
But also, I was fighting to make sure that the band got enough time to sound check. I was fighting to make sure that the mix was good, that the gear they said they were going to bring us to do our show was there and was working. And whenever anybody wanted to make it about something else, like they wanted to change the deal on her about how many tickets they had sold, or, you know, they wanted a VIP area, which I just think is the stupidest fucking thing you could possibly do at a concert. Like, VIP anything can just kiss my ass. Like, if you're planning an event and you start talking about VIP shit, your event sucks. Like, stop it, cancel it, like, shut it down. Like, if your event isn't cool enough that people just want to go and have the same experience, I don't think your event is that cool. So we always would try to shut down when people wanted to do, like, special areas or anyway, and you just end up arguing with people so much and just yelling at people so much. And, like, you know, I remember one time, the gig I think that was finally the last straw because I threw a huge shit fit. We were playing on the Santa Monica Pier. And when you play on the Santa Monica Pier, here you are sitting on the pier, you're on the pier, the band is here, you're mixing. But there's like thousands of people down on the beach, right? Now the sound company, like I can't go there. I can't get through the crowd. If I went through the crowd and came back, our set will be over. So I can't go there. They didn't set up a B-mix position where they're just like, if they had said, yeah, you're mixing for the audience, but there's a person down on the beach mixing for the beach. Okay, great, whatever. But they didn't even have it on a separate bus. They just tagged it off the mains. And now here I am with all the stage volume coming off the stage, mixing this like intimate jazz show. And, you know, this promoter comes up and he says, oh, the mix on the beach sucks. And I'm like, well, I can't solo it. I can't change it without changing this mix. So like, I was like, whatever you're paying the sound company is too much because they set it up in the dumbest way possible with no real zone control and no real way to monitor what's going on down there. Like, yeah, you're sending this mix that I'm putting through this big house PA. You're sending it to like a few 8-inch horns, you know, for people on the beach. It's like, of course it doesn't sound good, you know? And I threw a huge shit fit and then I got fired.
This is awesome.
Okay. The first time.
So I have to land the plane, but I also don't want to rob you of your time. 29 pedals.
Experience. Yeah, we don't have to talk too much about it. People either know who it is or they don't. It's fine.
Google it. The Una, I love it. Has made a substantial difference every time it's the right tool for the job. I now bring it with me, especially when guitar players have pedal boards. I just throw it in front every time. Love it. Do you have anything especially great on bass coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I always say that my JFET pedal is one of the best bass preamps that nobody uses. Like, it's got this X mode that I built into it specifically for bass, which is that, like, okay, adding low end EQ on bass is sometimes necessary, but it rarely actually sounds good, right? Because the shape is never correct. And so you always get some notes that'll jump out and some notes that won't. So the X mode just uses an old mastering trick where you put a big bump in way down at like 10 hertz. And not because there's anything down there, but because the shape of that curve is so broad that it makes a really gentle curve that lifts up everything else that's down there. So suddenly everything from, 200 down to 40 or 20 sounds really rich and musical, but it doesn't sound EQ'd. And like, not a lot of bass players take me up on that offer, but it's worth checking out.
Okay. All right. Noted. Well, man, this has been awesome. One of my favorite conversations ever.
Oh, no thanks. Joke. Well, I'll come back anytime. I can talk about a lot of shit. We didn't even talk about mics on guitar amps.
No, we didn't talk. There was
Did you get your Lizzy questions answered? I like to make sure people get their questions answered.
Oh yeah. I mean, I had a huge list where I was just like, I just hope that we can pop around on half of this, but, the drum stuff was great. Yeah, I will be re-listening to this multiple times because there's just so much style and reasoning, and it's not hype. And maybe we need some kind of like, I just pass you stuff, and I was like, hey, what's really going on with this hype product? I need you to tell me if this sucks or not. We need like a website where you're doing like sucks or not. Like you need your own review.
I don't like. I mean, here's what I'll say about that before we go. It's like I don't really like to call everybody out in that way because A, you never know what you're going to be wrong about in the long run, and B, a lot of people making this stuff are nice people. I think the accusations of hype and stuff like that often come from consumers and not people. Most of the people I know making gear are like nice people trying to make the best thing they can make for their customers. I know very few cynical people who are just exploiting customers for money, and most of them are Warm Audio. It's like an incredibly cynical company started by some hedge fund bros. They don't have any engineers on staff. They just import gear from China and charge you more money from it. Like, if you're willing to buy a Behringer or if you're willing to buy a Warm Audio product, you should buy the Behringer version, because at least Behringer is transparent and it's less money and it's equal quality.
You know exactly what you're going to get, like their 1073 or what, it's like, we were in this period where you're like, oh, well, I guess Warm Audio is going to undercut everybody, which like,
but that's the thing is like they're using Behringer quality to undercut people who are making you something better. So if price is your bottom line, you should probably go with the Behringer, because while I have issues with their business practices, they're at least very transparent about it. Uli Behringer owns a city in China where everything is vertically integrated. And, Warm Audio is using some suppliers that I know of in China. And they're just ordering gear from Chinese factories and then, putting American faces on it. And I don't think, I think it's just kind of bullshit. And the only people they're undercutting is people who are trying to give you a better product for that amount of money. Like the fact that the Warm Audio one costs more than the Behringer one is stupid, because they're both made in overseas factories. And when I used to work for Slate, I would get sent to some of these factories to check them out. And, when price is a consideration, I try not to be mad at the people I know for using those factories. But I will say that the people who work there don't have a ton of choice in their life. There's no such thing as a minimum wage when you work at those factory. They have zero labor protections. The intellectual property is all stolen from other designers. I don't think it's that defensible. The only thing that is defensible about it is that it allows you to make gear cheap enough that a lot of people can buy it. And so for people who require that kind of gear, I'm glad that an option exists, right? Because when I was a teenager, there weren't necessarily cheap compressors you could buy that were any good, or there weren't necessarily cheap pedals you could buy that were any good. And so now that the quality of that has been raised up a bit, so that your average teenager who's just getting started, doesn't have a lot of pocket money, can have some gear, great. I mean, you have to do some questionable things in terms of labor practices to get it. You have to do some damage to the environment in terms of shipping, things on boats and stuff like that to get it. But okay. The problem is when a company that is like based in Texas that essentially just hires marketing people and essentially just rips off the IP of anything that becomes popular enough on Reverb, they'll clone, right? Whether it's new or old.
Right.
And then you get people out on forums saying that like I'm a hype master because my pedal is hyped or whatever. But I don't place any ads. You're looking at where I work and live and stuff like that. Like, this is me. I'm just a guy. I tried to make a cool pedal. If people out there want to say it's overhyped, it's because people are hyping it. Like, I don't pay any of those people to hype my shit. Like, and
I love that.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, the closest thing I get is like some of the content creators that we use to do demos of videos, because they just produce better demos than I would produce myself. Some of them have fees because this is what they do for a living and I pay their fee. But paying their fee doesn't mean I get to tell them what to say about it. Like, you basically send them a pedal and write them a check and you cross your fucking fingers. And, I work with people who are reputable and nice, who care about the kinds of things I care about in gear. And sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't like it. It's like, the whole thing is weird. So it's like, so one of the reasons, I always tell you my opinion about a piece of gear if you ask about it, but I don't always call bullshit on things that I don't think are cool, because a lot of these people are small companies that are just trying to do their best,
Yep.
I remember like, a couple pedals that came out around the same time as mine that also got sort of like accused of being hype machine pedals. It's like, I don't know what the fuck these people are talking about. Like, who's saying it's good other than people who played it and liked it, because there aren't like whatever.
I have one question before we leave. And it's another maybe can of worms. So, help me work through something I'm thinking of on the back end. Okay. Pedals have always been innovation on top of innovation, circuit design that gets tweaked over here, tweaked over there, whatever. What is there a good moral line for you even, or a clone versus an innovation versus
I think that's actually I think it's really easy. So there's two things I will say. Number one is that I'd start all my designs from a blank sheet of paper, but analog electronics being what they are, you get to the end of the design and you can see some similarities between other things, right? I'm not so brilliant that I'm making anything that defies the laws of what op amps are supposed to be able to do, right? I'm not filling it with unicorn tears and getting cupcakes out of it, right? But I start with a blank sheet of paper and I say, what do I want the signal to do? I want the signal to do this. I want the signal to do this. I want the signal to do that. And you start building things and using shapes. And I use a lot of op amps because they're really easy to tweak. It's just building with op amps is pretty easy. So you get to the end and you have a cascaded design. So like you look at the flower and it's, there's some other shit going on in there, but there's two cascaded op amps and you see two cascaded op amps and you say, aha, that's a 250 or whatever, or that's a whatever. And it's like, well, it's not. I mean, does it have some similarities to tube screamers and 250s and other kinds of overdrives that have ever existed? Like, yeah. If you get an electrical engineer to put both schematics side by side, similar things are happening. But A, I didn't copy the schematic, right? And also B, if you think layering op amps makes everything a tube screamer, I have terrible news for you about SSL consoles, right? Because that's just cascaded op amps, doing things, you know what I mean? Like, it's just op amps doing I want the signal to go up. Oh, I want the low end to go up. Oh, I want the high end to go down. I want this to do this. And you do it and they all look kind of similar because it's just op amps and there's not that much to it. But then when it comes to cloning, I would say this, firstly, if you're a person sitting at home and you want to breadboard something, I think there's nothing wrong with you breadboarding something and making yourself, if you wanted to build yourself a clone of an LA2 at home, right? You just built it on your own out of parts that you ordered from Mauser or whatever. I think that's totally fine. I think that when you want to start selling them is when you start to encounter some of the rocks in the moral road, right? So, number one, are you telling people it is something that it isn't? So when you say, I will build you an LA2, right? Well, an LA2 has transformers, it has tubes, it has an optical circuit, it has a very specific optical circuit, it has really specific release characteristics. So if you're saying, I will build you an LA2 this big, are you really building an LA2, or do you want to build an optical compressor and paint it to look like an LA2, right? I don't expect everybody to be super technically savvy, so I think the moral imposition is on the builder to sort of say what the thing is. Also, some people will say, this is a heavily modified tube screamer. It's like, okay, what did you modify? You changed a few resistor values? I don't call that a heavy modification. I think so what you have to ask yourself is the reason this is going to sell because of someone else's idea or because of my idea? So if the changes you've made to it make it different enough that a real one wouldn't do the thing that yours does, then I think you're fairly in the clear. And I think that you should still shy away from cloning things because the other part of it is who's making it, When DoD wasn't making pedals and you wanted to have a 250, right? Or when Ross wasn't making pedals and you wanted to have a Ross distortion, nobody in the market is willing to make that pedal. And you step in and say, I'll make them. I'll make them exactly the same. I'll get an original one. I'll etch the circuit board the same. I'll do it exactly the same. I'll make them and I'll sell them. I think that's fair because no one was making and selling them. I think the problem happens when there's small companies like mine or other, companies that are getting pirated now, like John from EAE or 1981 or some of these other pedal manufacturers that have lots of people cloning their shit. It's okay, those companies are 2 or 3 people and they invented that and they did their marketing and they paid their employees. And if all you're saying is I can make you a cheaper version of something that exists because I didn't pay all that money that person paid to invent this thing and get it to you and and essentially create the thing, right? Wholesale. So then I think you start to run out of road, right? And I don't think it's a hard line, but I think it's pretty easy to set up guidelines for yourself where you know, like, what are you bringing to the table? What value are you adding? And are you simply taking advantage of the fact that somebody else is paying for most of the cost of that business? So let's say I'm going to invent a fictional pedal company called 97 Pedals. And 97 Pedals, I come up with a really cool overdrive. And it's really cool. And so I have to build 500 of them, which costs a lot of money. I have to send some of them for free to gear reviewers. I have to have an Instagram account. I have to have manufacturing. If I want to do sort of ethical manufacturing like I like to do it, I build everything here in California. So everybody who helps me build stuff gets paid California wages, has California labor protections. It's very expensive. Probably at the end of the day, I make like $30 a pedal. And I'm building it out of the nicest, highest quality shit that I can build for you, you know? And then if like somebody who's relatively handy with a soldering iron wants to say, God, this 97 pedal is really blowing up. I can make that cheaper, right? And it's because they're making it out of cheaper materials. They're not paying people's labor. They're not paying for the content creators who bring you the demos to show you it's cool. They're not supporting artists by giving them to artists so that they get on cool records so that you can hear the sounds they can make in cool ways. You know, it's not their full-time job, right? It's like, and it just becomes a very cynical way of doing business. And so I would say that like, the way to try to rate whether or not it's okay is to just ask yourself how cynical is it, you know? I mean, like, I had people clone one of my pedals, and I bought one of them because I wanted to see what it was like, and it was filled with the most garbage parts possible, right? From the cheapest supplier possible, which, you know, uses poor labor practices and sources things unethically, so that your tantalum caps may be coming from the Boko Haram tantalum mines when they're not supposed to, right? And it didn't sound the same. It didn't work the same. You know, and this person has a website and says, I make an even better version of that than that guy. And that's just a lie. And so don't lie to people. You know what I mean? If you're saying you're making it better, show how you're making it better out of better stuff. If you say you're making something that nobody else is making right now, or that you're bringing some innovation to the market or whatever, like, be prepared to show the receipts for that. And like, and if you're just going to say that everything is already a clone because so much innovation is built on innovation, I think you don't really understand design and like what it takes to actually get a product from idea to market. So it's like, there's less road that people have to go down if they just want to essentially like grab a Tube Screamer schematic and put it in a box and write a cool word on it. You know, they're going to paint it green. They're going to, I mean, mine's green, mine's not a Tube Screamer. They're going to paint it green. They're going to, you know, call it a Duck Screamer or whatever. And it's like, I don't know. It's just,
man, that's a great way to think about it. There is a little bit of a, like a, I hate to say it, but like, how much can we expect the consumer or the pedal reviewer even to know the context or understand what these people are doing?
Yeah.
And critical thinking is really important. And I feel like for each person, and you could maybe disagree, who knows, each person is, the fact that you're thinking about it at all,
yeah,
probably means you're winning and you're going down the right path with it. So,
yeah. Like, I build myself parts casters. I mean, part of it is like I have to look at my own behavior, right? So I build myself parts casters because Fender doesn't actually make the telly that I want, right? They won't make it. But I want a thing that looks like a telly that has these features that I want. So I build them for myself. I don't sell them. I won't build you one, you know, like mine for money, because it's not my IP. It's Fender's IP. These parts are already out there that you can buy. You can buy a telly body. You can buy these pickups and stuff like that. Fender's licensed some of them. They haven't licensed others, you know, but I'm just buying parts and building stuff for myself. I don't sell these guitars to people. You know, I think mainly the thing is like when you start selling something or when you're trying to turn it into a business, you know, if a friend of yours down the street builds clones for fun and he makes a clone of something and you think it's cool and he's your friend down the street, you know, I don't think any of us in the pedal community want to come after that guy. You know, we want to come after the cynical people who are doing it like because they think that we're ripping you off or something, or they want you to believe that like there's some, you know, class warrior or something like that. It's like, dude, I don't understand I don't understand taking something in that way. I don't understand taking somebody's idea in that way. I think like having been a songwriter and an audio engineer for many years, you go into a studio, you come out with some 3-chord tunes pretty often. You know what I mean? You come out with some stuff that sounds pretty similar pretty often. But we all know the difference between somebody who went in to the studio intentionally trying to rip somebody off. Oh, Green Day had a big hit with this song. Let's make something that sounds like that. We all know those type of people. And we all know people who just write their songs and it comes out sounding a bit like, you know, whatever. It all sounds like roots rock. It's like whatever. I think you look at the character of the person who's doing it and the goals of the person doing it and the process of the person doing it. And then you just have to make your own call. And in the community of people who are more aware of it, involved, like builders and content creators and brands and things like that, I just think you have to call bullshit when you need to call bullshit. You know, if you had 20 more minutes, I have another rant about it, but like about a specific brand. But you know,
no, this is perfect. Thank you so much. I wish I had 20 more minutes. We might have to do it again, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for traveling. It's really fun.
Yeah, we hit up Jesse. Are you still doing a Discord?
Yeah, my Discord's open for anybody who wants to join. There's an invite on my website that's pretty easy to find, and if it's not working or something, you can just email me.
Join the Discord. Join our Discord too. I'm gonna promote that. Yeah, and go check out Believable.
How do I join yours?
Oh, good question. I haven't posted about it in a minute. We'll sync up after this, but looking forward to what you come out with next, and all you bass people, we will be back to normal programming next time.
I didn't even get to show you my favorite bass, which I wanted to show you.
Show me the bass. Show me the bass.
Partscaster bass. Okay, I used to always play a Hofner in gigs and stuff like that, and then I got tired of kind of being a Hofner guy, and also it is a little bit limited. So I built a P bass and I built a J bass, and I didn't really vibe with them. So I found this guy on eBay who makes conversion necks, and it's a short scale bass neck, so it's a 30-inch scale bass, but you can see how it looks a lot longer because it's designed to just pop onto a telly body. So it's a 22 fret or a 20.
That is 24 awesome.
Fret. But it's 30-inch scale. But what's cool about it is F is basically where it would be on a J, because the way the neck is sitting. So F is out here, so you get short scale, but without feeling cramped when you're down in the low end. Like, you don't always feel like you're playing it like this, you know what I mean? And then also, because I play bass with a pick a lot, the bridge isn't at the back of the body. The bridge is sort of where it is on a telly. And so for palm muty pick players like me,
that's awesome.
And I put Mini Humbucker and Bill Lawrence, and it's cool. I built it.
That is super cool. Wow. Oh.
Yeah, and the guy on eBay is called DC Kunkel. He doesn't post necks very often anymore, but I'm sure you can get other neck companies like All Parts to make you a conversion bass neck.
Now I want it.
But it's the comfiest bass I've ever played.
Are you a round wound or a flat wound guy?
I'm a flat wound guy. Because I think it's because I play mostly with a pick. It's like
it's that nice. I don't know.
Oh yeah, all my favorite players are flat people. You know, McCartney, Jamerson. I don't know about like Bruce Thomas back in the day. I think he was probably a round wounds guy, but they sound really old. You know, I don't like to have to age strings in either. Like flat wounds just kind of sound like that right out of the bag. Whereas like you put round wounds on something, it sounds zingy for like 3 months. I try to put round wounds on my J, and I'm just kind of like, I don't know. They're for a different type of player than me, you know, especially not with a pick. Round wounds with a pick is rough.
The amount that I get hired to do it, I'll say this: the only flat wounds I could get away with at every gig, and most people not even notice I had flat wounds on, were the Ernie Ball Cobalt flats. They are freaking dope. They are made to sound like round wounds, but they don't. They still sound smooth, but they're pretty high output and whatever.
Oh, that's cool. I'll have to check those out. I've gone back and forth because on my P, I use the Labellas. They make like that special Jamerson set.
Right.
And then for my Hofner, I use the special Hofner set that they make. But then I've tried to put them on like their sort of regular flat set on this bass, and I didn't love them, so I ended up putting JHS ones on there, which I really like. Because the JHS ones, I guess not all flats are like really done with ribbon wire. Like some of them are like fully ground, which is like I like ground wounds. I still call them ground wounds as we called them in the 90s. So like I like ground wounds on guitars a lot rather than ribbon flats. But on bass I like to have the proper like full flat.
Love it. Well, thank you again. We will have to catch up. So this has been Jesse, Believable Audio, 29 pedals, front of house extraordinaire, engineer.
Thank you so much for having me. Have me back whenever, because I can clearly talk for 2 hours at the drop of a hat.
No, yeah, I legitimately want to. So, all right, see ya.
Awesome. Okay, take it easy.